Hi, welcome to and I'm Scott Bradfield, the master, and that's Dodo the parakeet, or one of those creatures from Hieronymus Bosch. We just finished talking about Flaubert's Saint Anthony, and that was my temptation. I managed to keep her off, and her and the harpies. And we're talking today. We're doing a few quick ones again. It's the 4th of July. We're trying to avoid running around with flags sticking out our butts and try to sit home and read a couple of good books and talk about some books. And I hope you're having a good holiday with your friends. We're doing a very quick one today. It's Cormac McCarthy. We're continuing to read through all of his work. I'm rereading almost everything I've read before, except for this. I just got up to his play. And again, we do all our research while the camera's running in this stupid show. This was published in 1994. It's called The Stonemason. It's the closest to, I guess it's the only play. He wrote some screenplays, and he wrote a kind of play in two voices or something, which I don't know. I did read parts of that. But this is an actual play, and it's worth reading. I have never read this before. I'm just going to give you, there's a few things about it that are quite interesting. And it's not, I don't think McCarthy's a great playwright. It's sort of a novel in prose, kind of like The Temptation of St. Anthony we talked about the last episode. It feels more like a novel in prose. It's so stagey. I think there's one guy named Ben talking about himself while he's on stage. And anyway, the setup of the story is a little too complicated for me. I like reading plays in the bathtub. I haven't read a lot of plays in the bathtub, but I remember reading lots of Arthur Miller and reading lots of Edward Albee. Used to be fun to read in the bathtub. Or Oscar Wilde's plays are hilarious in the bathtub. You'll definitely stir up some suds with Oscar Wilde in the bathtub. And I enjoyed reading this. It was a little too talky. It's just like it has that about his novels. It's just a lot of people kind of talking about the kind of horrors of the world and the horrors and the beauties of the world. And the main premise is a black family in, I don't know where this says here in the back, in the 70s in Kentucky. Whatever the back cover tells me must be true. And it's about a young guy named Ben. He's the third, there's like 3 generations of this family called the Telfairs. And they're all stonemasons. So there's a grandfather they call Pawpaw, and he's in his early 90s throughout most of this book, near the end of his life. And then his son is named Ben. And then Ben's son is the central character of Ben. Is sort of the young man who's also a stonemason, or he's going into stonemasonry. And it's basically about the kind of difficulties of this family, being black in Kentucky and trying to get through and do hard work and take care of their family. They have one member of the family named Soldier, who's a young kid who gets involved with gangs and kind of disappears. Most of the story, the reason it doesn't really work as a play is it's almost all in talk. People are talking and telling what's happening off stage. And it's the sort of thing that a lot of novelists, like myself, if I had written a play, would probably do more than they should. And but it still reads well as a kind of novel, as a kind of short novel. And there's some very good stuff in it. It's not as horrific as Cormac McCarthy stuff. It's the closest to a realistic novel I think I've read of his. I think there's almost no, even in the Border trilogy, you go off into some weird, fantastic visions of the West, or you go into some big, super cowboy passages, like when John Grady outruns the sheriffs and all that stuff. And they're a little over the top. There's almost none of that in this book. What it does have is a kind of a respect for this old man. The whole story is centered around this old man named Pawpaw, who was a stonemason. Please don't, I know I'm going to get everything wrong, because I don't know anything about stonemasonry, except that the part that makes McCarthy interested in this whole story is the art of the stonemason. He clearly, that's what interests him, is the notion that these people who do this, who are stonemasons, have a whole set of, they're incredibly attentive to every single stone and every chip of every stone, everything they put into their work. If they're building a wall or they're building a house, and that there's a whole scientific rationale between almost every stone they place. And that if you're an artist, even if you're poor and black and living in this town and being treated terrible and constantly broke, which this poor family is going through, and your grandson is tempted by drugs and violence, you still can commit yourself to this beauty of doing something right. I'm just going to read a couple of passages because that's the best parts of the whole book, really, are some of these passages where Ben talks about the importance of stonemasonry, and then I'll leave it to you whether you want to read it. It's worth reading if you want to be a completist with McCarthy. He says, because there is nothing that will separate the work from itself. So the work, we kind of talked about this with Flaubert. The work that you produce is all that matters. You can't separate it. There's no meaning for it. There's no purpose for it. It has to have its own internal beauty. The work is everything, and whatever is learned in the doing is learned in the doing. So you don't learn morals. You don't learn anything. You just learn how to make something beautiful. The way Flaubert makes a beautiful book. You don't really learn anything about God or Madame Bovary. Speculatives, they were called, noblemen who were made honorary masons, and this is about the masonry, the clans of masons who pass on this information about how to be good stonemasons. And if it is true that laying stone can teach you reverence of God and tolerance of your neighbor and love for your family, it is also true that this knowledge is instilled in you through the work and not through any contemplation of the work. So there's like as there in most McCarthy books, there's a kind of philosophical passage at the center of this, which is that the work is more important than what we think about the work, what we learn from the work. All trades have their origin in the domestic and their corruption in the state. And there's another typical kind of, almost every time there's politics in Cormac McCarthy, it leads to horrors. Almost every time men get together to do things, they do horrible things. And then it's at the home, in the hearth, where families are made and families are kept taken care of, where there's actually a life worth living. One or two more passages. Is there? Here is one more. He's talking about his grandpa and pawpaw, who dies eventually because he's really old. And as a journeyman, you learn your craft by being a journeyman, and I guess you become a mason or something like that. The wisdom of the journeyman is to work one day at a time. And he, pawpaw, always said that any job, even if it took years, was made up out of a day's work. Nothing more, nothing less. That was hard for me to learn. I always wanted to be finished. And that's it. You can't, every passage about stonemasonry, you cannot help, especially being a writer, understanding that that's what McCarthy is finding interesting in the story. If you write a book because you want to finish it and show it to everybody, you're not going to get the pleasure out of writing that book in the same way the stonemason produces something. It's not the completion of the work. It's the day's work, and every day after day after day, which McCarthy does throughout his life, really works hard. And I would say that most of us, who we find something we love to do, like the characters in this book, the beauty is in that. It's not the production. It's that daily enjoyment of the work and producing something you think is beautiful. Anyway, that's my quick summary of the book. It's a good book, good read. It's the only one I have. It's only one other thing. I haven't read one of his screenplays called The Gardener's Son. But everything else I've reread. I'm enjoying rereading it. I want to do a list soon of writers who are probably worth reading in their entirety. There aren't a lot of them. There's a lot of writers who wrote lots of great books. But most of the time, I can't think of a writer like McCarthy who every one of his books is worth reading. John Updike wrote a lot of wonderful books and a lot of boring books. And you could probably skip half of them. I think it's worth reading almost every book, and you can enjoy every single book. Don't you agree, Dodo? Dodo enjoys tearing things apart. That's her stonemasonry. Or writing novels. She loves tearing hemp structures apart. That's what you enjoy. Okay, let's try not to do anything. Happy bathing. We're going to do one more of these quickly. Bye.